My name is Maya Collins, and last Christmas, I learned that betrayal can wear a designer dress and smile across a dinner table. We were at my mother-in-law's grand holiday party in Greenwich, chandeliers glittering, champagne flowing, 30 guests pretending perfection. Then, in front of everyone, Vivian, my elegant, calculating mother-in-law, proudly introduced a young blonde woman to my husband, Ethan, and said, "She'll be perfect for you, after the divorce." Every breath in the room stopped except mine. I smiled, raised my glass, and said calmly, "By the way, the house you two are talking about, it's in my name, not his." You could hear the silverware drop. Tell me, what would you have done in that moment? Stayed quiet, or set the record straight like I did? And while you think about it, tell me where you're watching from, because today's story will show how calm becomes power. 8 weeks before that Christmas night, life still looked perfect from the outside. Our townhouse on the Upper West Side was everything a success story was supposed to look like: polished oak floors, curated art pieces, a kitchen island gleaming under pendant lights. I had built my company, Collins Crisis and Reputation, from a one-woman consultancy in my tiny Cleveland apartment into one of the most sought-after PR firms in Manhattan. My days were packed with client meetings, media calls, and strategy briefings, rebuilding the images of politicians, CEOs, and tech founders who had lost control of their own narratives. Ironically, I didn't realize mine was slipping too. Ethan worked for his family's firm, Walsh and Pierce Investments. To outsiders, we were the perfect pairing: brains and pedigree, ambition and legacy. But lately, our lives had begun to move on parallel tracks that no longer met. He came home later each week, blaming client dinners that didn't exist on his calendar. His phone, once carelessly tossed on the counter, now stayed face down, locked with a new passcode. He smelled different: a faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and expensive. He'd started going to the gym at odd hours and replaced his wardrobe with slimmer suits, softer fabrics, as if he were rehearsing for a different role. I told myself not to overthink. In my line of work, suspicion was muscle memory. I could dissect a scandal before it hit the news cycle. But this wasn't a client, this was my husband. Vivian's calls came daily that fall, disguised as check-ins. She'd perfected the art of insult wrapped in concern. "You're doing wonderfully, dear, but don't you think Ethan deserves a wife who's more present? A woman can't build a home if she's always building an empire." The first few times, I laughed it off. Then I stopped laughing. She had always seen me as an interloper, a Cleveland girl with scholarships and hustle, not heritage and connections. When Ethan married me, he married down in her eyes. She never forgave either of us for it. One Wednesday evening, while he showered, I walked past his phone charging on the dresser. A message lit up the screen before fading. "Can't wait to meet your family tomorrow. P said I should call myself your friend for now." My throat tightened. The initial P wasn't random. Vivian's full name, Vivian Pierce Walsh. The air in the room thinned. For a moment I simply stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of the shower, the sound of water hitting tile like a metronome counting down the seconds before my world shifted. That night, I barely spoke. I lay awake beside him, tracing the faint line of light from the street across the ceiling. My mind replayed every phone call from Vivian, every business trip Ethan had taken, every moment I had dismissed as work stress. Patterns formed like cracks in glass, subtle, spreading, impossible to ignore. The next morning, I asked, gently, "Who's Lily?" He didn't flinch, didn't pause long enough for guilt. "Client's associate," he said easily, reaching for his tie. "Why?" I shrugged. "You got a message about dinner." He smiled, the kind of smile that lies through its teeth. "Oh, that nothing. You know how Mom likes introducing people at events." He kissed my forehead and left. I sat there, tasting the bitterness of the lie, and realized I'd been living in the crisis I was supposed to be managing. 2 days later, Vivian posted a photo on her social feed, a dinner table set for 12, captioned, "Wonderful evening meeting new friends." Ethan looked so happy tonight. The holidays are going to be extra special this year. The image cut deeper than the caption. Beside her sat a blonde woman I didn't know. Lily, presumably. The comments were full of hearts and compliments about Ethan's lovely company. I closed the app, stared at my reflection on the dark phone screen, and whispered, "So this is what being replaced looks like." Still, a part of me refused to collapse. I was used to being underestimated. In Cleveland, my father had worked double shifts at a steel plant. My mother waited tables, and I learned early that no one hands you dignity, you earn it. I'd earned mine through sleepless years, rejection letters, and clawing my way into rooms that weren't built for girls like me. That armor was still there, even if it had dents. Then came the final straw, a text from Vivian, meant for someone else but accidentally sent to me. She's perfect for Ethan. Sweet, elegant, not one of those career women who forget family. Can't wait for Christmas, it'll be just the right setting to help him move on. My chest burned as I read it. Not anger yet, just a cold clarity, the kind I'd seen in clients seconds before they realized their scandals were about to explode. I typed 3 words in reply. Message received, Vivian. She never responded, but I knew she'd seen it. The read receipt glowed like confirmation. That night, Ethan mentioned his mother's annual Christmas gala, only family and close friends, around 30 guests. His tone was casual, rehearsed. "Mom really wants us there," he said. "She thinks it'll be good to reconnect." I nodded, pretending to believe him, pretending to be the wife who hadn't just read her own eviction notice from her marriage. Inside, something shifted. Grief turned to strategy. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I would find the full story, piece by piece, and when the truth stood bare in the same house where they planned to humiliate me, I would make sure every single one of them learned what it felt like to underestimate a woman who knows how to handle a crisis. The morning after Vivian's accidental text, I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open, a mug of black coffee untouched beside me. The city outside was still half asleep, pale sunlight creeping across brownstone facades. My inbox pinged with client updates, press kits, crisis timelines, contract renewals, but I couldn't focus. For years, I'd been the woman companies called when their reputations were crumbling. I built systems, not reactions. I understood that emotions were traps if you didn't pair them with evidence. And right then, I realized that was exactly what I needed: evidence. Not tears, not confrontation, just data. By noon, I had found my private investigator. Jason Lee, ex-NYPD, the kind of man who spoke in short, measured sentences and never promised more than he could deliver. I met him at a coffee shop in Midtown, the kind of place where the noise of steam wands and jazz playlists swallowed secrets whole. 3 weeks, I told him, sliding a file across the table. I want timestamps, receipts, photos, everything. And if you can, confirm who introduced them. He didn't blink. Understood. I'll update you every Friday. The first week was the hardest. Every text notification from Jason's number made my pulse spike. When the first email arrived, I stared at it for a long time before clicking. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Ethan and a blonde woman at Marcelino's, the Italian place near Bryant Park, sharing wine. Another of them walking along Highline Park, his hand brushing her back in a gesture I used to know by heart. Then a shot of them at the Hudson Pier Hotel parking lot. My stomach twisted as I read the attached note. 3 hours. Checked in under L. Harris. Paid with joint visa ending 44-23. That night, I opened a new Excel file. Title, Joint, Spend. XLSX. I poured everything into it: transaction, dates, amounts, locations, categories. Restaurant bills labeled, client dinners, rideshare trips that didn't align with his work hours, boutique purchases in Soho I'd never seen delivered. I color-coded them. Blue for meals, yellow for gifts, red for hotels. It looked clinical, detached. I forced myself to treat it like a case file, not a marriage autopsy. By the second week, patterns emerged. Every late meeting corresponded with the same areas on the city map. Jason's photos confirmed it: different clothes, same woman, same proximity. There were smiles that didn't belong to strangers. I couldn't even call it passion. It was something more methodical, curated. Like Vivian's invisible hand had arranged the lighting, the timing, even the introductions. One evening, while Ethan was showering, I scrolled through our bank app. The numbers I saw weren't just digits, they were betrayals in transaction form. $198.75, Marcelinos. $423, Bergdorf Goodman. $61.40. Lyft, Hudson Pier. The dates aligned perfectly with Jason's timestamps. My breath steadied as I took screenshots of each one, naming them 1 Ampere, 1B, 1C, like evidence tags. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I sat in my office staring at the chessboard my father had given me when I was 12. The pieces were worn from years of use, the black queen slightly chipped. I remembered his voice, calm and steady as he moved the pieces. Never make a move until you can see the whole board, Maya. Emotion makes you impulsive. Vision makes you win. I whispered it aloud to the empty room. See the whole board. So, I did. I cross-referenced Ethan's calendar with his gym check-ins. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8:30 p.m. Workouts. But the gym's digital check-in system showed he never stayed more than 15 minutes, just long enough to mark attendance and leave. Meanwhile, the security camera by our front door recorded him returning home close to midnight. I copied every timestamp into the spreadsheet. Every lie had a pattern, and his was beautifully predictable. By the third week, Jason handed me a small flash drive in an unmarked envelope. "Everything you asked for," he said. "And one thing more you might want to know: who connected them." My fingers tightened around the envelope. Who? He didn't even look up. "Your mother-in-law. Charity gala, mid-September. Lily Harris, real estate agent, introduced as a potential client." That night, I opened the photos and let them cycle slowly across the screen. The charity banner gleamed in the background, gold letters spelling Walsh Foundation Annual Dinner. Vivian stood between them, her manicured hand resting on Ethan's arm, smiling at the camera as if she were gifting him to someone. Lily's expression was polite, unaware. Ethan's eyes, those told another story. I sat there in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside. My first instinct was to scream, to throw something, to wake him up and force the truth out of him. But instead, I opened a new folder labeled Walsh Stage Prep. Inside, I saved everything: photos, receipts, summaries, witness logs. I even included a note to myself. No confrontation yet. Collect, verify, confirm. Move only when every square is visible. For the next few days, I lived two parallel lives. By day, I was the composed CEO in tailored suits, hosting client strategy meetings and calming executives in panic. By night, I was my own crisis manager, documenting betrayal in numbered files. Ethan noticed my silence but mistook it for exhaustion. "You work too hard," he said once, kissing the top of my head. I smiled faintly. "So do you." Isolation became routine. I didn't tell Olivia, my best friend. I didn't call my father. Secrets like this grow teeth when spoken too early. I ate in silence, slept on my side of the bed, and learned to breathe through the weight in my chest. The loneliness wasn't new, it just had a sharper edge now. But within that silence, something else began to stir. Not rage, not despair, precision. One night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk again. The spreadsheet was almost complete: 57 entries, totaling over $12,000 spent on his affair. I printed them out, each line a record of deceit. Then I looked at the flash drive one more time, its small red light blinking like a heartbeat. I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted a new beginning, Ethan. I'll give you one." Anderte. 3 weeks before Christmas, the evidence was no longer speculation, it was a portfolio of truth. Every receipt, every photograph, every late-night lie had been translated into proof. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't even shake. The grief had burned itself into something colder, cleaner, control. I understood now that emotions were luxuries, and strategy was survival. If Vivian had built her empire on manipulation, then I would build my defense on precision. On Monday morning, I called Sofia Diaz, my longtime corporate attorney, and asked if she was available for a personal matter. We met that afternoon in her midtown office overlooking Bryant Park. She'd handled my company contracts for years, and she knew the way I thought 3 steps ahead, no theatrics. "Tell me everything," she said, her tone crisp. So I did. I laid out the affair, the photographs, the joint expenses. She listened, jotting notes in her immaculate handwriting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "First," she said, "you're protected. Your prenup is airtight. The firm drafted it to separate all premarital assets, your business, your retirement accounts, and any income derived from them. Ethan has no claim." She flipped through the pages. I'd brought our bank statements, property deed, insurance documents. "And the townhouse?" "Bought it 3 months before the wedding," I replied. "In full, no joint financing." Sophia smiled faintly. "Then, it's yours." "That's not just luck, Maya, that's foresight." I looked out the window at the gray Manhattan skyline, wondering when foresight had turned into defense. She continued, her tone matter-of-fact. "There's also a financial infidelity clause in your prenup, you remember that?" I nodded. I had almost forgotten it was a clause she'd insisted on when I first married Ethan, an afterthought at the time. "Any use of joint marital funds for an extramarital relationship qualifies as a breach," Sophia said, tapping her pen. "You can demand reimbursement or adjust the property division accordingly." I thought of my color-coded spreadsheet. 12,000 and change, I said quietly. "Documented." "Good. Keep the originals and copies in 2 separate locations. Digital, encrypted if possible." We spent the next hour building the skeleton of a timeline. The filing date, the evidentiary notice, the formal service. She laid out each phase like moves on a chessboard. I could almost hear my father's voice. "See the whole board." Sophia looked up from her notes. "When you file, you'll need to be ready for backlash from Ethan's family, especially his mother. I can shield you legally, but not socially." I smiled thinly. "That part, Sophia, I can handle myself." Ari won. That evening, I sat at my dining table surrounded by papers, the deed to the house, the prenup, insurance policies, my will. I began to update every beneficiary, every emergency contact. My firm's revenue would now funnel into a new business account under my name alone. I opened it discreetly at a smaller private bank downtown, one known for confidentiality. The joint account stayed active, but I left just enough money to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Grocery deliveries, utilities, Ethan's weekly gym charges. Nothing more. In the quiet hours after midnight, I logged into our shared life insurance portal and removed Ethan as the primary beneficiary. I replaced his name with my cousin Grace, the only relative who had never asked me for anything but honesty. Then I drafted an updated will, half my estate to Grace, half to a nonprofit fund I plan to establish someday. A program to help women rebuild after financial abuse. It wasn't irony, it was symmetry. By the weekend, my documents were airtight. I kept the originals in a fireproof safe at my office and stored encrypted backups on 2 drives, one hidden in my desk drawer, the other in a safety deposit box under my company's name. Every angle, every vulnerability sealed. It was less about revenge now, more about integrity. I wanted no part of their chaos infecting what I'd built. Ethan remained oblivious, wrapped in the cocoon of his own deceit. He'd begun humming again in the mornings, the way he used to when we first got married. It might have been guilt or arrogance. Either way, it didn't matter. I responded with the same calm professionalism I gave difficult clients, measured smiles, polite nods, nothing personal. He mistook my composure for peace. He didn't know it was preparation. 2 weeks before Christmas, I made 2 final calls. The first was to Grace, my cousin, a paralegal in Boston who had always been my quiet anchor. "I might need you on standby during the holidays," I told her. "If I text you a word, just one, you'll know I'm okay, but I'll need you to stay reachable." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Got it." The second call was to Olivia, my best friend since college. I didn't tell her the full story either, only that I might need a place to breathe after Christmas. "Whatever you need," she said immediately. "Even if it's just silence." When I hung up, I realized how small my circle truly was, and how strong. It wasn't pity that held it together, but quiet loyalty, the kind that doesn't broadcast itself on social media. I had exactly 2 people I could trust. Everyone else, I'd outgrown. The following Monday, I met Sophia again to finalize the paperwork. We sat in her office as she organized everything into neat labeled folders. "After you file, you'll need to maintain composure," she said. "Don't engage emotionally. That's what they'll expect: rage, hysteria. Instead, give them silence and precision. It's far more devastating." I smiled, because she was right. I'm a crisis manager, Sophia. Silence and precision are my native languages. On my way home, the first snow of December began to fall, soft and soundless. The city lights blurred through the windshield like streaks of gold and white. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. The plan was complete. The board was set. I didn't know yet how the reveal would play out, but I knew it would happen on Vivian's stage, under her chandelier, in front of her curated audience. She loved control, ceremony, spectacle. I would give her all 3, just not in the way she imagined. Christmas night came dressed in perfection. The Walsh estate glowed like something lifted from a magazine, garlands woven around marble banisters, candles flickering in crystal holders, an orchestra of laughter echoing from the great hall. Vivian had outdone herself this year. 30 guests, each hand-picked from her carefully pruned social circle, investment partners, family friends, distant relatives whose worth was measured in their net portfolios. The dining table stretched nearly the length of the room, glittering under chandeliers the size of small planets. At one end sat Vivian, queen of her domain, poised with the authority of someone who had choreographed every detail of the evening. At the other end, me. Placed strategically beside Uncle Jack, the family's unfiltered commentator, whose fondness for red wine made him unpredictable but oddly reliable when truth decided to slip through. Across the table, Ethan sat directly opposite Brooke Allen, the woman who had unknowingly become the centerpiece of Vivian's plan. She looked polished in a cream-colored dress, her blonde hair swept into a soft chignon, posture perfect, smile radiant but nervous. She wasn't malicious, just misplaced. I studied her quietly, almost clinically, the way I might analyze a public figure about to walk into a scandal. She had no idea the room she'd entered wasn't a dining hall, it was a trap, disguised as family warmth. Vivian's voice carried effortlessly over the soft Christmas jazz playing in the background. "Brooke, darling, tell everyone where you studied again?" she asked, her tone feigning modest curiosity. Brooke smiled shyly. "Harvard Business School. I graduated 3 years ago." The table hummed with impressed murmurs. Vivian turned to her guests with that signature smirk of hers. "Isn't that wonderful? Just like our Ethan. Both brilliant young professionals, both with such bright futures." The words hung in the air, polished daggers wrapped in ribbon. I felt the weight of eyes sliding toward me, sympathetic from some, curious from others, hungry from most. I set down my wine glass, deliberately slow, the stem clicking softly against the table. "Harvard must have been quite the experience," I said lightly, smiling toward Brooke. "I went straight from undergrad to building my own firm, so I sometimes wonder what I missed." My tone was pleasant, the undercurrent sharp. The kind of remark that sounded like conversation but landed like a mirror. Vivian's friends, women in diamonds and lacquered smiles, watched closely, waiting for cracks. But I'd learned long ago that silence unnerves the powerful far more than confrontation. So, I smiled, nodded when appropriate, and let them think they were still leading the dance. Dinner moved in practiced rhythm. Each course introduced another layer of Vivian's performance: lobster bisque followed by veal medallions, then her signature chocolate torte, which she loved to call the family recipe. She'd mention it at least twice per event, always adding the line, "I only share it with family." It was her way of defining the border between inclusion and exile, subtle, smug, effective. The conversation was just as choreographed. Vivian steered it effortlessly toward Brooke, her new favorite. "And you're in real estate now, correct?" she asked, turning to her like a talk show host tossing softballs. Brooke nodded. "Yes, I'm with Madison & Co., here in the city. I really love helping people find homes that fit their dreams." "That's so lovely," Vivian cooed. "Such a people-centered profession. I imagine it requires a lot of trust." I set my fork down, dabbing my mouth with a linen napkin. "Trust is everything," I said quietly, not looking at Vivian but at Brooke. "Especially in relationships. Clients or otherwise need to believe they're being told the whole truth. Once trust is broken, well, it's almost impossible to rebuild." A few guests shifted in their chairs. Ethan's hand tightened around his wineglass. Brooke gave me a polite, confused smile, sensing tension she couldn't name. Uncle Jack chuckled under his breath. "Sounds like you've seen a few contracts go south, huh?" he said, swirling his glass. "You could say that," I replied. The room rippled with restrained laughter, though the undercurrent had changed. The music continued, the candles flickered, but something fragile had started to bend beneath the civility. Vivian caught my eye across the table, her lips curving in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've always had such a knack for saying so much without saying anything, Maya. Must be your PR background." "Crisis management," I corrected gently. "Not PR. My work isn't about polishing lies, it's about cleaning up after them." A beat of silence followed. Vivian's smile stiffened. "Of course, dear," she said, waving it off. "We all have our talents." Brooke, perhaps trying to ease the discomfort, turned to me. "It must be stressful though, always working with people's reputations on the line." "It can be," I said, taking a sip of wine. "But I've learned that reputations are fragile only when built on deceit. Truth has a way of surviving the fire." Ethan coughed quietly, pretending to adjust his collar. The smell of tension mingled with rosemary and butter. Across the table, one of Vivian's friends leaned in to whisper to another. I could feel the shift, the collective awareness that something unscripted was beginning to bleed into the perfect tableau. Vivian, ever the master of control, tried to steer it back. "Well," she said brightly, "Brooke's been such a blessing this season. She's been helping me with a few properties in Greenwich. A brilliant negotiator, really. So thoughtful, so attentive. She even stopped by last week to help me decorate the tree." "How lovely," I murmured. "It's rare to find someone so available during the holidays." The words were gentle, but they landed like a blade dipped in honey. Uncle Jack let out a small laugh, oblivious. "Available's one word for it," he said, earning a sharp glance from Vivian. Ethan's jaw tightened. Brooke looked between us, uneasy. The orchestra shifted to a softer tune. The Christmas waltz. The candles wavered in the air-conditioned breeze. Every sense felt heightened, the clinking of silverware, the faint crackle of the fireplace, the rhythmic sound of knives cutting through roasted beef. I could feel the pressure building, a kind of social claustrophobia that made every polite smile feel like suffocation. But I didn't break. Instead, I smiled and leaned slightly toward Brooke. "Real estate must teach you a lot about people," I said conversationally. "About what they say they want, and what they're really looking for." She nodded, relieved to find neutral ground again. "Absolutely. Sometimes clients think they know what they want: a penthouse, a view, a certain lifestyle, but what they really need is something completely different. How perceptive, I said softly. That kind of awareness must take years to develop. For a moment, our eyes met, woman to woman, truth to innocence. She didn't realize it yet, but the entire evening was a negotiation, a house of cards built on deceit, waiting for the faintest shift of air to collapse. And I was that shift. I lifted my glass again and smiled across the table, my voice smooth, warm, and perfectly steady. To honesty, I said. In business, in family, and in everything that pretends to be love. Glasses clinked half-heartedly. No one met my gaze. The performance was still going, but the music beneath it had changed. The stage was ready. All I had to do now was wait for Vivian to cue the final act. The conversation shifted the way a river shifts under winter ice, quiet on the surface, pressure roaring underneath. Vivian dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin and smiled, that hostess smile she'd perfected over decades, a smile that said, "Everything in this room exists at my pleasure." "You know," she began, her tone light and velvety, "I always tell the younger generation that what seems right at 25 might not be right at 35. People grow, paths change. When people grow apart, it's a kindness, not a failure, to admit it." She tilted her head toward Brooke and Ethan with theatrical innocence, and a wave of agreeable murmurs rippled down the table. It was the sort of line that sounds wise until you notice the stage directions hidden inside it. Across the candles, Ethan held his fork like a pencil, tapping the tine against the rim of his plate. Brooke smiled, uncertain whether to bask or retreat. I let the silence settle for a beat and then gave it shape. "That's true in real estate, too," I said, cutting cleanly through beef and myth. Buyers swear they need floor-to-ceiling windows and a south-facing terrace, and then you show them a quiet pre-war with honest light and no view at all, and something in them just unclenches. They recognize what they actually need. That's the moment trust is earned, when you reveal there's no hidden agenda. I held Brooke's gaze on the last phrase, not accusatory, not even pointed, just steady, like a level placed on a wonky table. She brightened with relief, eager for neutral ground. "Exactly," she said, warming to the topic. "A lot of people don't even realize they're not being fully honest with themselves or their agent. Sometimes they'll say they're single when they're not. Or they'll omit the part about a partner who isn't ready to move yet. It complicates timelines, expectations." That. A clink traveled the length of the table as if a knife had just struck crystal. Vivian's smile did not falter, but something in her eyes flashed fast, predatory. Ethan's shoulders drifted closer to his ears. Uncle Jack, 3/4 of the way through his second generous pour, laughed softly, the sound carried on old cologne and Bordeaux. "Oh, it complicates things, all right," he said, delighted by a memory only he could see. "Had a case once in the 80s, couple told me they were separated. Whole family was on board. Turned out, the wife found out at the final walkthrough, and the girlfriend found out at the closing. Lord, you've never seen a man learn the cost of square footage so quickly." The table chuckled because decorum required it, then the chuckle died. Because everyone understood what it meant to pay by the square foot of your character. Jack popped a bacon-wrapped date into his mouth, entirely at peace with the grenade he'd just rolled under the tablecloth. Vivian attempted a pivot with the grace of a seasoned MC. "The point is," she said brightly, "Ethan and Brooke have so much in common: education, values, a love for the coast." "Brooke, didn't you say your family has a cottage on the water in Greenwich?" Brooke nodded, her posture straightening by instinct. "It's been in the family for generations," she said, cheeks faintly pink with pride. "Just a little place, really. Around us, heads tilted in admiration, calibrated to old money." Vivian beamed, turning her face to the room so the light caught her cheekbones. "Isn't that lovely?" she said. "Our family has always believed in heritage. In finding partners who understand responsibility, tradition." The words fell like lace, delicate and suffocating. Tradition is a beautiful thing, I said gently. Until it becomes an alibi. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The sentence moved through the air like a cool draft you blame on a door someone left ajar. Grace, at the far side with the cousins, set down her glass, eyes narrowing just a fraction, instinct picking up frequencies polite society pretends not to hear. Karen, the cousin's wife who had been kind since day one, glanced at me with a question in her face that held equal parts invitation and warning. Are you all right? And also, should I stay close? Tell us more about your work, Brooke, someone said from down the table, a friend of Vivian's with a haircut like a helmet. It must be terribly stressful, negotiating so many feelings while overpaying is practically a civic duty in this town. Laughter. Brooke smiled, grateful. It's a lot of listening, she said. You have to hear what people aren't saying. They'll talk about square footage and schools, but really they're telling you about fear, security, status. They'll say we're flexible because they're afraid of losing the deal. They'll say we're ready because they're afraid of losing each other. For a heartbeat, the truth of that was too heavy for anyone to pick up and pretend it was just dinner talk. Ethan reached for his water. Vivian lifted her wine like a shield. That's why I adore you, she said to Brooke, her voice a lacquered caress. You're intuitive. And intuition is so important when people change. Her gaze skated right over me and landed back on Ethan as if she were blessing a new prince. Sometimes, she continued, the kindest thing a family can do is accept that a marriage has simply reached its natural conclusion. No villains, just maturity. She wanted the words on record, a preemptive verdict delivered under candlelight to sanitize the crime. I let her have the floor and then took it back with a feather touch. I agree about villains, I said, dabbing my mouth. It's incredible how often they're not the ones people point to. Ethan's knife caught on china, a small sound that traveled farther than it should have. George, at the head, cleared his throat with paternal awkwardness. Well now, he said, striving for jovial. Let's talk about something festive. Jack, didn't you carve the roast at Street Andrews last week? Carved it, baptized it, and sent it to heaven, Jack said cheerfully. But if we're being festive, I've got a better story. Boy from my office thought he'd found his soulmate at the office Christmas party. Turned out he'd found HR. Twice. Laughter again, but this time it stuck in the throat of the room. The rhythm of forks against plates faltered and then resumed like a heartbeat, skipping and correcting. Karen leaned closer to me as servers lifted plates for the dessert course. Are you okay? She whispered without moving her lips. I'm fine, I said, and it was almost true. You look magnificent, she added, and squeezed my hand beneath the tablecloth, a small act of rebellion in a room organized around submission. Vivian rose slightly as the chocolate torte emerged, glossy and precise, each slice plated with a dollop of cream. Family recipe, she said to a chorus of admiration. I only share it with family. The line landed with the smugness of an inside joke. I lifted my eyes to hers and gave her the smallest smile. I've been asking for that recipe for years, I said lightly. Must not have checked the right box. A few people looked down, suddenly invested in the architecture of their dessert. Vivian's smile sharpened. Your family, dear, she said. Just, perhaps not the baking kind. Ah, I said, as if we'd reached a shared understanding. Some of us build kitchens, some of us build deeds. A small silence opened and closed like a blink. Brooke ate 3 polite bites and set her fork down carefully, peace offerings no one would accept. Ethan reached for conversation the way a drowning man reaches for driftwood. Brooke was just telling me about a property in Back Bay, he said. Historic details, great bones. Great bones are only great if the foundation isn't cracked, I replied, taking a sip of coffee. Otherwise, you end up paying for charm with your ceiling. Amen, Jack said, delighted. Ceilings tell the truth, so do ledgers. He glanced down the table, eyes twinkling. And so do wives. The room made a collective throat sound, half laugh, half warning. Vivian's head turned slowly toward Jack. "You always did love a story," she said, something metallic in her tone. "Only when they're true," he returned. "And when they end with a decent settlement." George coughed again, but this time there was resignation in it. He was a decent man who had made a long career of looking the other way, and even he seemed to sense that the hallway he'd walked 1,000 times had lost its exits. Grace rested her elbows lightly on the table, eyes on me with the calm of a witness who intends to testify if called. On Vivian's side, the women who'd been smirking earlier now exchanged the smallest looks, faintly panicked, faintly thrilled. They'd come for theater, but they understood they were watching an earthquake reorganize the room beneath their chairs. Brooke turned to me, voice soft, almost pleading without meaning to be. "You must see a lot of stories like this in your work," she said. "People whose public lives don't match their private ones." I could have hated her in that moment. Instead, I recognized the particular loneliness of not yet understanding the story you're in. "Sometimes," I said. "And most of the time, if you listen long enough, it's not the scandal that's the problem. It's the lie about the scandal. People can forgive a storm. What they struggle to forgive is the person who insists the sun is shining while handing them an umbrella." She swallowed, and I watched comprehension begin to sketch itself in the air around her like scaffolding. She glanced at Ethan, then back at her plate. The confidence she'd worn like a borrowed coat seemed to slip from her shoulders. Vivian set down her glass with ceremony, the cut crystal catching and breaking the light into theatrical shards. "Well," she announced to the room, voice bright with the relief of a finale she believed she controlled. "Whatever happens in the new year, I'm just grateful we can all be here tonight, civilized, honest, supportive. It's what families do when people discover who they really are meant to be." She lifted her chin toward Ethan and Brooke, tiny, unmistakable coronation. There it was, the thesis of the evening, the validation she needed on record. A few guests nodded as if they'd been waiting for this cue. Karen looked down, jaw tight. Grace's gaze didn't move. George's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass until his knuckles paled. Jack poured himself a little more wine and murmured, not quite under his breath. "And sometimes the lamb carves the butcher." No one was supposed to hear him. Everyone did. The heat in the room rose, though the thermostat hadn't moved. Even the candles seemed to burn steadier, taller, as if oxygen had grown scarce and they were rationing flame. Somewhere, a waiter stumbled slightly and righted a tray without a sound. Etiquette tried to reassert itself. Coffee was offered, spoons placed at angles with the precision of military drill, napkins folded atop plates like truce flags. But the truce had expired. We had passed from pageantry into weather, and everyone knew storms obeyed no hostess. I felt the weight of the crimson folder in my clutch like a pulse. My breathing was slow and exact, my face arranged in the same pleasant composure I wore in boardrooms minutes before a press conference detonated a CEO's career. The isolation of the past weeks contracted into a diamond point of focus. Pain had done its work, competence had replaced it. Around me, the polite world continued its pantomime because it did not know what else to do. Across from me, Brooke's certainty thinned to thread. Beside her, Ethan's mask flickered. At the far end, Vivian's smile gleamed like chrome. Vivian lifted her crystal glass like it was a crown, her voice cutting through the murmur of silverware and half-finished laughter. Before dessert, she announced brightly, "I'd like to make a little toast." The orchestra paused, as if even the strings sensed the air tightening. "This Christmas feels especially meaningful," she continued, smiling down the table, her eyes landing first on Ethan, then on Brooke. "When families grow, sometimes it's not about adding new generations, it's about finding the right people who truly fit. People who bring fresh air, fresh hope. Brooke, darling, you've been such a blessing to us. Intelligent, kind, elegant, honestly, you'd be perfect for Ethan after the divorce." Her words hung in the air like a grenade with its pin pulled. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Brooke's smile froze mid-curve. Ethan's glass stopped halfway to his lips. George looked up sharply, disbelief breaking across his usually calm face. Even the waitstaff at the edge of the room faltered, pretending not to hear what they had absolutely heard. I felt something inside me settle, not break, not rise, just settle. It was the quiet clarity that came before precision. I placed my napkin gently on the table, smoothed its corner, and rose from my chair. "How nice," I said softly, my voice carrying across the long mahogany stretch. "Did they mention that the house Ethan and I live in is in my name and that the prenup is still very much in effect?" The silence sharpened. Vivian blinked, her mouth opening, closing, opening again like a fish gasping for air. Ethan went completely still. Brooke looked from face to face, confusion painting her expression as she tried to decode what was happening. I took my time buttering the small piece of bread left on my plate. I wanted them to feel the stillness, the patience, the confidence that comes only when you've already won. "Actually," I continued, my tone conversational, "since we're being honest tonight, let's put a few things on the record." I turned toward Brooke, not unkindly. "When exactly did you and Ethan start seeing each other? Was it before or after the charity gala in September, the one where Vivian introduced you?" Color drained from Brooke's face. I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you are," I said gently. "But don't worry, I have the dates." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the crimson folder, the one that had waited weeks for this moment. Its edges caught the chandelier light as I opened it. "You see," I said, glancing around the table like a presenter beginning a quarterly report. "As the owner of a crisis management firm, I'm a bit obsessive about documentation. So when I noticed irregularities, I started keeping track." I slid a photo onto the table. Ethan and Brooke at Marcelino's, wineglasses raised, his hand on hers. That was October 14th. He told me he was meeting a client for dinner. Another photo. The High Line Park, dusk behind them, his jacket draped around her shoulders. October 20th, he said he was working late. I placed the third one carefully on top, the Hudson Pier Hotel parking lot, his arm around her waist. November 2nd. He was supposed to be at a conference in Boston. Brooke's eyes widened, Ethan's lips parted, but no words came out. "Now," I said, my voice even, "I'm not one for drama. But since my name is attached to all of this literally, on the deed I thought it best to ensure the facts were clear." I pulled out a printed spreadsheet, crisp and color-coded. "This," I said, tapping it, "is a record of every joint transaction Ethan made during the affair. Dinners, gifts, ride shares, hotels over $12,000 in total. All from our shared account. Which, thanks to the prenup, classifies as financial infidelity. That's legal terminology, by the way, not emotional." A ripple went through the room, small gasps, chair legs scraping. Uncle Jack muttered, "Well, I'll be damned," before taking another sip of wine. Vivian's face was crimson. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're making a scene in my home." I turned to her calmly. "Am I? Or are you just shocked that the script changed?" I let that sink in. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems you've been hosting these little dinner parties with Brooke while I was supposedly out of town. You even told her, didn't you, that once the divorce was final, she'd be moving into the big house." Vivian froze. Her jaw clenched, eyes darting toward Brooke in panic confirmation enough. "Emily," Ethan began, but I cut him off with a small, raised hand. "Don't," I said. "Not here, not now. You see, Vivian wanted a public humiliation. She wanted me quiet and compliant while she paraded your mistress at a family event. But I deal in reputations, Ethan. And the thing about reputations is, they don't survive on fantasy, they survive on truth." I let my gaze return to Brooke. She was pale now, her eyes glistening as understanding dawned. "You didn't know," I said softly. "You thought you were in love with an available man. You thought his family welcomed you because you were good for him. But really, you were a prop in Vivian's little play, a convenient symbol of the life she thought her son deserved. She used you as much as she used him." I guess. Tears welled in Brooke's eyes, her lip trembling. He said you were separated. He said you both agreed it was over. I nodded slowly. He lies well when his mother holds the strings. Don't blame yourself, just learn from it. Ethan slammed his glass down, wine splattering across the white tablecloth. Enough, Maya. No, I said, still calm. Not enough. Not until you hear the rest. I turned to the guests, who now sat frozen, suspended between fascination and horror. I want to be clear, this isn't about revenge, it's about respect. 7 years of marriage, 4 years of building a life, and 8 weeks of being deceived by 2 people who should have had the decency to face me directly. I looked back at Ethan. You wanted out, you could have asked. You didn't need to stage an affair audition with your mother as the casting director. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Vivian's friends avoided her gaze. George, quiet until now, spoke at last, his voice low, trembling. Vivian, what have you done? She started to protest, but he raised his hand. No. You've embarrassed this family for the last time. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, the Queen had no words. I gathered the photos and papers neatly, stacking them back into the crimson folder. For those concerned about propriety, I said, the divorce papers are ready and will be filed tomorrow morning. Everything is documented, notarized, and perfectly civil. Ethan can remain in the house for 2 months while he finds somewhere else. The rest, as Sophia Diaz, my attorney, will confirm, is handled. I turned to Brooke one last time. I hope you understand now it was never really about you. You were just the pawn Vivian needed to make herself feel powerful again. Don't let her keep you small. Brooke nodded, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I know, I said softly. And you don't owe them anything. As I slipped the folder back into my clutch, I met Vivian's eyes. You wanted control, Vivian. You wanted to remind me that I was never enough for your family. But you forgot the most important rule of power. It belongs to the one who can walk away with everything that matters intact. I picked up my glass and raised it slightly. To truth, I said. And to the women who choose it. The chandelier flickered once, catching the reflection of crystal and tears. No one moved. Brooke stared down at her untouched dessert. Ethan sat rigid, his knuckles white. Vivian's composure finally cracked, the tremor in her hand betraying what the voice could not. And me, I sat back down, calm as snowfall, while the world they'd built so carefully around lies began, at last, to melt. The morning after the dinner, Manhattan looked colder than usual. An icy, unfeeling kind of silence that fit the aftermath perfectly. My reflection in the window of the town car was steady, detached. No mascara smudges, no shaking hands, just composure. The kind of composure you earn when there's nothing left to prove. The crimson folder rested beside me, sealed now, its purpose fulfilled. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I stepped into the marble lobby of Diaz and Keating LLP, signed my name on the dotted line, and filed the divorce petition. Sophia met me in her office with 2 cups of coffee, hers black, mine with oat milk, no sugar. Everything's in order, she said, sliding the documents toward me. No contest. He'd be insane to challenge it. He might still try, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Maybe, she replied, but you've already won. The prenup protects all premarital assets, and the financial infidelity clause will ensure reimbursement for the joint account misuse. $12,000, plus legal costs. You'll keep the townhouse, the business, and all retirement accounts. I nodded, signing where she indicated. Each stroke of the pen felt less like loss and more like reclamation. When it was done, I set the pen down and exhaled, slow and deliberate. Sophia smiled faintly. You're remarkably calm for someone ending a marriage. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline cutting through winter haze. It ended long before today. I'm just filing the paperwork. Back at the townhouse, Ethan's things were already half-packed, neat rows of shirts and suits, cufflinks laid out like soldiers preparing for exile. He didn't speak when I walked in, just stood there holding a box labeled office. "I'll stay until the end of the month," he said, eyes fixed on the floor. "You can stay longer," I replied. "Just not here." His head jerked up, startled by my tone. "You don't have to be cruel." "I'm not," I said evenly. "I'm being clear, there's a difference." At 7:03 a.m., the next day, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was soft, trembling. "Maya, it's Brooke." For a moment, I considered hanging up. But curiosity or maybe compassion stopped me. "You don't owe me anything, Brooke," I said. "You don't need to explain." "I do," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear. Vivian told me you and Ethan were already separated, that you were difficult. She said she was just helping him move on." I believed her. I could hear the crack in her voice, the shame crawling its way through each word. "He lied to both of us," I said quietly. "Don't carry his guilt." "I ended it," she said, hurriedly, as if seeking absolution. "I told him I never wanted to see him again. Vivian called this morning, she was furious. Said I embarrassed the family. But honestly," she hesitated, "I think she's just scared. Everyone saw who she really is." When we hung up, I stood in the quiet of my office, looking out over Midtown. Snow flurries floated past the glass, catching the city lights like tiny shards of grace. I didn't feel triumphant, just free. By noon, word had spread through the Walsh family like wildfire through velvet. George called first, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "Maya, I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stopped Vivian sooner. She's been impossible for years, but last night what she did, there's no excuse." "It's over now," I told him. "That's enough. She's refusing to speak to anyone," he continued. "Locked herself in the study this morning, told the staff she's not taking calls. Rachel's furious. I've never seen my daughter that angry." Rachel, Ethan's younger sister, showed up at my office later that day with a bouquet of white lilies and a face full of guilt. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she blurted out before I could even greet her. "I knew Mom was manipulative, but I never thought she'd do that. Brooke's not even the first one. She's been trying to replace you for years, someone younger, more malleable. I guess she finally found someone naive enough to play along." I set the flowers on my desk, their scent sharp and clean. "You don't have to apologize for her," I said. "But thank you." That evening, George called again. This time his tone was firm, almost weary. "I made her sit down," he said simply. "Vivian. She's been stripped of all authority in the family business. The board voted this afternoon. Effective immediately." He paused, the silence stretching. "It's strange," he added softly. "For the first time, she's quiet." I didn't respond right away. There was no satisfaction in hearing that she'd fallen, only inevitability. People like Vivian didn't break overnight. They eroded slowly under the weight of their own deceit. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Ethan, cornered by the evidence and exhausted by the social fallout, signed the uncontested agreement without protest. The court date was brief, 15 minutes in a downtown courtroom where the judge, after skimming the paperwork, looked up and said, "Miss Collins, your documentation is thorough. Very thorough." Sophia smiled beside me. "She's a professional," she said. When it was done, I walked out into the winter light, the sound of traffic folding around me like an urban lullaby. My ring finger felt lighter, my breath deeper. The headlines in the family's social circle were already turning. Vivian Walsh loses control of Walsh and Pierce family office. Sources say daughter-in-law's exit triggered internal fallout. I hadn't spoken a single word to the press, didn't need to. The truth had a way of traveling on its own. By the end of the month, Ethan was gone, moved into a rented apartment in Westchester. The townhouse was mine again, stripped of his things, scrubbed clean of ghosts. I relocated my main office to Midtown permanently, expanding the company and reclaiming the part of my life I'd put on pause for him. The same week, my firm landed a new client, a senator's office embroiled in a reputational scandal. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months salvaging my own name. Now I was back to salvaging others. Late one evening, as I sat in my corner office reviewing case notes, Sophia called. "Everything's finalized," she said. "The reimbursement from the joint account cleared. The clause worked perfectly. You're officially, legally, and financially independent." I smiled, tracing the city lights across the glass. "Then it's done." But she hesitated. "Maya," she said carefully, "you know this isn't just an ending." "No," I said, closing my laptop. "It's a reintroduction." Outside, New York moved on horns, footsteps, sirens, a pulse that matched my own. Behind me, the crimson folder sat locked in a drawer, a relic of precision and pain. Ahead of me, the skyline shimmered like a chessboard waiting for its next move. Vivian had lost her crown. Ethan had lost his audience. And me? I had found something better, silence that no longer meant defeat, but peace on my own terms. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, the story found its second life not in courtrooms or dinner parties, but online, in the place where stories shed names and grow wings. I hadn't planned it, at least, not consciously. The LinkedIn article began as an impulse on a quiet Sunday morning in my new Midtown office. The city was still asleep outside, a watercolor of snow and glass. I opened a blank post, intending to write something small, something measured. Instead, I wrote the truth, stripped of names, dates, or revenge. The title read, "Financial Infidelity is Still Infidelity." The tone was clinical, almost academic. I outlined the behaviors joint accounts quietly drained, business trips that weren't, the weaponization of financial dependence. Then came the checklist. Monitor shared expenses, protect your digital access, document respectfully, never emotionally. I ended with one line that felt truer than anything I'd ever written. Dignity is not silence, it's precision. I hit publish, half expecting nothing. By evening, the article had crossed 50,000 views. By Monday, it had crossed 1 million. The comment section filled with voices that sounded eerily like echoes of my own. Women who had been erased from their own financial lives, men who had been manipulated into guilt, professionals who had mistaken composure for weakness. A family law attorney reposted it with the caption, "Print this and tape it inside your prenup folder." A wealth manager from Chicago added, "The cleanest revenge is a balanced ledger." By Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal had emailed my assistant requesting a quote for a feature on reputation recovery after domestic betrayal. Bloomberg wanted a short interview for their weekend podcast. CNBC reached out next, asking if I'd appear on a panel about crisis management in personal branding. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built a company helping others survive public ruin, and now I'd become the case study. But what stunned me most were the private messages. Thousands of them. Women from Houston, Seattle, Toronto. Secretaries, surgeons, teachers, stay-at-home mothers. They wrote things like, "I thought it was just me," or "You gave me permission to stop apologizing." One message simply read, "I buttered the roll today." It took me a moment to realize what she meant. Then I saw it. Someone on TikTok had clipped a segment of a podcast that quoted my line from the article. "Butter the roll. Drop the receipts." The clip had gone viral, amassing 3 million views in a week. The meme spread like wildfire, women using it as a metaphor for quiet, poised confrontation. A teacher in Ohio filmed herself calmly confronting a cheating partner over dinner, captioned, "Number Butter the Roll Challenge." A financial advisor in London hosted a seminar titled, "Drop the Receipts, Protecting Yourself Financially Before It's Too Late." Suddenly, I wasn't just Maya Collins, founder of Collins Crisis and Reputation. I was Maya, the woman who buttered the roll. The phrase became a cultural shorthand for controlled exposure, for reclaiming power without shouting. I watched, half amused and half awed, as strangers quoted my words to each other with reverence usually reserved for poets or saints. It wasn't scandal, it was solidarity. And that distinction mattered. I hadn't named Ethan or Vivian, hadn't revealed locations or brands. The story existed only as architecture, betrayal, data, consequence, rebirth. It spread clean, without gossip, without rot. In Greenwich, the ripple effect was immediate. Vivian's name, once synonymous with refinement, began to shrink in conversations. Her charity invitations declined, brunch tables grew quieter when she entered. The same women who once mirrored her opinions now avoided her gaze. In social circles built on reputation, invisibility was the cruelest punishment. George called once more not to apologize, but to update. She started therapy, he said simply. Marriage counseling. Anger management. The whole alphabet. There was no triumph in his voice, only exhaustion. She says you humiliated her. I didn't, I replied. She humiliated herself. I just turned on the lights. Ethan, meanwhile, surprised everyone. He resigned from Walsh and Pierce, citing a personal reevaluation of values. 2 months later, Rachel texted me a photo Ethan in a classroom, chalk on his sleeve, smiling awkwardly beside a whiteboard full of equations. He's teaching algebra, she wrote. Says he finally feels useful. I didn't reply immediately. I just stared at the image for a long time, then whispered, good. Because that was the truest ending for him, not destruction, but humility. The recognition kept growing. By spring, I was on a panel at Columbia Business School titled Crisis Management at Home and Work, the same chessboard. Students took notes as I explained emotional containment, data strategy, narrative recovery. But beneath the professional veneer, I could feel the undercurrent, the quiet understanding that this wasn't just theory. It was survival, disguised as strategy. That night, as I walked back through Midtown, neon reflected off puddles like fractured glass. My phone buzzed again, a DM from someone named Elenop, TX. I read your piece 3 times. My MIL is Vivian too. Thank you for reminding me that silence can be power if you hold the receipts. I smiled. The world was full of Vivians. But maybe now, it was also full of Mayas. A week later, a journalist from Fortune introduced me at a gala as the woman who turned personal betrayal into a public masterclass in control. The audience laughed lightly, applauded. But I wasn't thinking of applause. I was thinking of that dinner table in Greenwich, the weight of the knife, the sound of the clock, the calm before I spoke. Power, I realized, had never been about dominance. It was about precision. About knowing when to speak, when to pause, when to let evidence speak louder than outrage. Somewhere in Connecticut, Vivian was learning what silence felt like when no one filled it for her. Somewhere in Westchester, Ethan was rediscovering honesty in the simplicity of numbers. And somewhere online, another woman was buttering her roll, preparing to drop her own receipts. The internet had crowned me, but it wasn't fame, it was confirmation. The world had validated what I already knew the night I stood in that golden dining room. That grace under fire was not weakness, it was weaponry. By the time I got home that night, my inbox was full again, book offers, interview requests, collaboration pitches. I ignored them all. I poured a glass of wine, opened the window, and watched the city glow like circuitry. For the first time in a long time, the world was quiet, and the noise belonged to someone else. The meme would fade, the headlines would change, but the principle would remain simple, timeless, unshakable. Butter the roll, drop the receipts. Then walk away. Spring came late that year, soft and deliberate, as if the world had agreed I'd earned a slower thaw. The townhouse no longer echoed, it breathed. The heavy art pieces Vivian once mocked as cold modern had been replaced with framed sketches from local artists I admired. I no longer left my laptop open in case Ethan needed something. I no longer checked 2 calendars. My life, at last, fit inside one. 6 months after the article went viral, the Quiet Table Fund launched under my company's nonprofit wing a legal and communication scholarship for survivors of financial and reputational abuse. I named it for the image that had haunted me ever since that Christmas dinner, that long glittering table where I learned silence can be strategy. The first two recipients were a single mother from Detroit studying finance and a young paralegal who'd helped her aunt escape a fraudulent investment marriage. Watching them sign their letters of acceptance felt more restorative than any courtroom victory ever could. On weekends, I started volunteering again, something I'd abandoned during my marriage because it didn't fit the family image. The first time I walked into a shelter to give a workshop titled Protecting Your Paper Trail, the women looked at me like I was something between a lawyer and a lifeline. One of them said quietly after class, "You sound calm, like you've already forgiven everyone." I smiled. "No," I told her, "I've just stopped auditioning for apologies." All this. It was around that time I met Daniel Parker, a pediatric surgeon who had read my op-ed on crisis management and emailed to thank me for helping him navigate a malpractice smear campaign at his hospital. He'd written, "You don't know me, but your words kept me from saying something emotional when I needed to stay strategic." We met for coffee at a quiet spot near Bryant Park. He was 35, thoughtful, the kind of man who asked questions and actually waited for answers. He didn't flinch when I talked about the divorce or the viral storm. He just listened, then said, "You handled it like a surgeon, clean cut, no infection." We started seeing each other on weekends, slow, deliberate, no pretending. He never asked what Ethan had done. He asked who I wanted to be next. We made one rule early on, the transparency rule. Every financial decision over $500, we told each other. Not because we didn't trust, but because we refused to live behind curtains again. He joked, "Radical honesty makes boring bank statements." I said, "That's the point." One evening in early fall, we sat in my kitchen, the same one where I once rehearsed speeches I never gave. The light from the Hudson spilled in, pale gold across the countertops. Daniel was chopping vegetables, sleeves rolled up. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Do you ever regret it? Going public like that? Exposing everything?" I wiped my hands on a towel and thought for a long moment. "Regret?" I echoed. "No." That night, she tried to humiliate me publicly. I just chose to answer in the same language, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "I didn't throw mud, Daniel. I opened the curtains." He nodded slowly. "That's cleaner than revenge." "It's not revenge," I said, smiling faintly. "It's recovery. Sometimes the bravest win isn't winning back what you lost. It's walking away and realizing you never needed it to begin with." He leaned across the counter, brushing my fingers. "Then here's to walking." The following week, I stood on a panel at a women's leadership summit in D.C., delivering a talk titled, "Silence is Not Weakness, Building Authority After Betrayal." When I stepped off stage, a college student handed me a folded note. It said, "I buttered the roll, I dropped the receipts. I left." I kept it in my wallet, a reminder that what began as survival had become a movement. By winter, the noise around the scandal had faded entirely. Vivian stayed out of the public eye. George retired quietly. Ethan sent one email on Christmas Eve. "Thank you for being the mirror I was too afraid to look into." I didn't respond. Forgiveness didn't need acknowledgement, it just needed space. That night, Daniel and I hosted a small dinner, nothing extravagant, just friends, laughter, soft jazz, and the smell of cinnamon. When dessert came, I buttered a warm roll, smiling at the irony. Daniel caught the look and raised his glass. "To receipts?" he teased. "No," I said, lifting mine. "To clean slates." The next morning, I went to my midtown office early, before the staff arrived. The sun broke through the glass towers, flooding the room in white gold light. On my desk sat the old crimson folder, its edges worn. I opened it one last time, not to relive the evidence, but to honor the woman who had gathered it. Then I slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk and closed it, the soft click sounding almost like closure. Outside, the city roared on, alive and indifferent. And for the first time in years, I didn't need the world's silence to feel peace. I had built my own. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere out there, someone is being made to feel small. Someone's told to stay quiet, to not make it ugly. I want you to remember this: you can be quiet and still be powerful. You can walk away and still win. If someone's crossing your boundaries, start by writing things down. Dates, receipts, words, not to destroy, but to protect. Dignity doesn't mean silence. It means evidence, composure, and choice. So, document, prepare, choose yourself. And when the time comes, speak truth, not for revenge, but for release. Because the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting out.